And it is the longest solar eclipse until the 22nd century. And we're going to show it to you live just around the corner. In the meantime, joining us now is Dr. William Gooch, an astronomer and chairman of the Hayden Planetarium here in Manhattan. He's going to tell us what we're really seeing as the sun fades to black. Welcome. This has to be a very exciting day for you. I know you're not there, but in a way you get to see it directly by being here with us today. Now, if you were at the Hayden Planetarium, would you be able to look through some special equipment and actually watch the solar eclipse as it occurs?
We will see a little bit here in New York, a little bit later on.
2%, I think, is that all?
So we'll have our telescopes out with filters, and folks can stop by and see.
But these, again, just because we've said this before many times, once again, don't look directly at it. There are no filters that the average person can use that will really avoid their being hurt. So tell us first what a solar eclipse is so that we can understand how it actually occurs.
Okay. Solar eclipse is simply the moon passing between the Earth and the sun. And so the moon blocks out the sun's light for a short period of time, eclipsing the sun. If you're in the right place, which was that narrow little band that you showed on the globe a few minutes ago in the graphic, then you're in the right place to see the moon actually cover, at least for a few seconds, in this case up to almost 7 minutes, the bright disk of the sun, and you see the total phase of the eclipse. If you're within a few thousand miles of that thin line, you get to see the moon cover part of the sun, and so you see a partial eclipse of the sun.
Now, how fast does all of this occur? I mean, from the time that this begins to the time that it ends, there's a certain speed to all of this that we'll never recognize. We only see it in slow motion.
The moon's shadow touched down about 1,200 miles west-southwest of Hawaii a little over an hour ago. At that point, it was moving at about 16,000 miles an hour. By the time it reaches the big island of Hawaii, momentarily, it will have slowed to 6,000 miles per hour, plunging the big island into the moon's shadow. And then slowing still further, it will cover the next 2,200 miles to Baja, California in 70 minutes flat, and then proceed on through Central America and on into Brazil, where the total eclipse will occur at sunset for the folks down there.
Now, these pictures we're seeing courtesy of GTE Hawaiian Television. We're starting to see the eclipse over Hawaii, and as you notice, at 1:10 p.m. Eastern Time. So give us a sense now of what actually is occurring as these pictures
the bright crescent that we saw in that image is actually the sun, and the dark bite that we see out of it is the moon.
The reverse, of course, of what we see at night. When we start to really see the crescent as the moon, we see the different phases of the moon.
Here the bright is definitely the sun, and the piece that's missing, the bite that's missing, is the moon coming in between the Earth and the sun.
Now, as that goes further and further over, as the moon passes between, there is a point in which they call it that there is a glow like a diamond. Tell us what that means.
This, I want to describe this, yes, in a little bit of detail before we actually see it, because it's going to happen fast when it happens.
So you better watch quickly.
What we're going to see as we go live is a very thin crescent of light left, which will be the last piece of the sun still poking out from behind the moon, the bright part that we see with the eye called the photosphere. And then, seconds before totality, all but a tiny part of that bright disk of the sun will have been covered by the moon. Just a diamond left, and we will begin to see around the dark rim of the rest of the moon the lower atmosphere of the sun for the first time, known as the chromosphere and the corona. And so we have this ring around the dark disk of the moon with this bright area that's still the little piece of the sun's surface showing, and so we call it appropriately the diamond ring effect. The diamond will grow smaller and smaller.
Here's a live picture of what's going on right over Hawaii.
Very thin crescent left to the sun there, and that crescent is going to get slimmer and slimmer over the next couple of minutes. We'll go into this diamond ring, as I said. The diamond ring will get smaller and smaller, and then we'll break into a thing called Bailey's beads, a string of tiny little diamond sparkles along the edge of the moon. That's the last pieces of the bright disk of the sun shining out through valleys between mountains along the edge of the moon. And then instantly, in a moment, we will be plunged into totality. For the first time, the faint atmosphere of the sun, the corona, will blaze forth, and this will look like a black hole in the sky, surrounded by this ghostly pearly glow called the corona, about the brightness of the full moon, safe for the first time to look at with the eye, and surrounding, peeking out around the edges of the dark disk of the moon, red tongues of fire which astronomers call prominences. These are condensations of hot gas in the low atmosphere of the sun, and also the result of explosions on the surface of the sun.
Now, as we're watching this, is there any kind of exchange, because you mentioned something about the gases, chemical exchanges, gaseous exchanges, that could have any effect on the moon by the heat of the sun in terms of passing in front of it, or on the Earth?
There are explosions on the surface of the sun, which we call flares. They have the energy of millions of hydrogen bombs per second. Particles are shot into space from the sun at up to 2.5 million miles per hour. They reach the Earth, and that's what causes the northern and southern lights that we see, these particles crashing into our atmosphere up above. But we're protected down here on the surface. It goes on quite regularly, has nothing to do with the eclipse, and we're safe down here on the ground.
What effects, however, might it have on northern lights? Would they be more brilliant as a result of this eclipse?
Actually,
would we see anything atmospherically that's
just
different?
less, just the opposite, because the moon is now covering all of this activity up for a little bit of time. But on either side of this, yes, and we're in an active period of solar storms right now on the sun, and so we've seen a lot of auroral activity just in the last 5 to 6 months.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the things that people think might occur and find out what's fact and what's fiction. What about the tides? Would the tides be affected by
Not really. They're high at this time of the month when the moon is near new, but that's true when the moon is new every month. So, no, not particularly higher tides.
Think about in ancient times when this would occur, and people would think that this was the precursor of the end of the world.
This is scary stuff. If you were an agricultural society and the sun was going away, that would do the asparagus crop in. So people used to go out and beat drums and shout and throw arrows in the sky and try to chase away the evil spirit. And the good news is it always worked because the eclipse did end. So I guess they got positive reinforcement. We're coming up very close now, probably only a minute or two before totality. That thin crescent of light getting smaller and smaller, and depending on how the cameraman operates this, we may or may not see the diamond ring. It's critical to get just the
exposure right. We have 3
right.
cameras out there, and 2 of them directly on the solar eclipse as we see it. One from the observatory that's in the Big Island of Hawaii, and the other from the Hyatt Hotel that's there. And so we're going to try to get the best possible picture that we can for our viewers.
Here we go, just a tiny bit left. I think pretty soon, if he diaphragms open, you will begin to see the diamond ring momentarily. And that could shrink again to form this little line of bright beads called Bailey's beads, the sun peeking out through the valleys between the mountains on the edge of the moon, and then into totality, and you will see this ghostly halo called the corona, the atmosphere of the sun, become visible for the first time.
It is amazing how quickly this is closing down, like a shutter closing down right in front of your eyes.
And the moon, although 400 times smaller than the sun, is 400 times closer, and so they appear exactly the same size in Earth's skies, which is very convenient. It's just an accident of nature. Only takes place on this planet, and only on this planet are there people to look up and see it.
We are seconds away from a total solar eclipse.
Right now, it's almost as dark as a night under the full moon. Okay, he's taken the filter off. Okay, we're now operating without a filter. We're seeing the last little blazing rim of sun. And I dare say fairly soon, if he diaphragms out, we'll begin to see this diamond ring effect as the rest of the rim of the moon begins to fill in with the lower atmosphere of the sun. Okay, he's going to have to diaphragm out, and we should be into totality. There we go, totality. So we've missed the diamond ring, unfortunately. We didn't have the camera quite set right. But here's totality. The moon now perfectly fitting over the bright disk of the sun. And for the first time, that glare that we're so used to in the sky is gone. People are standing in what feels like nighttime under the light of a full moon right now in Hawaii. It is an unearthly sight to see this black hole in the sky. Orange light is ringing the horizon. The brighter stars and planets are now visible to the people on the beaches in Hawaii. I've seen grown-up folks just lose it at this point. It is an awesome sight.
Do the birds stop singing, for example?
Animals can be fooled into thinking it's night. They're a little confused, but they begin to roost and things like that. You begin to see near the edge of the sun, if you look toward the top and the bottom, it almost looks like a painting in the sense that you might imagine that there are like brush strokes in that corona. That is not your imagination. That is actually charged gases in the corona that are lining up along the magnetic field of the sun. It's like the old bar magnet experiment that we did when we were kids in school, where you took a piece of paper, laid it on a bar magnet, and sprinkled iron filings on top, and the iron filings lined up in the shape of the magnetic field. And that's the same thing here. You're seeing the gases at the top and the bottom of the sun. They're around 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock in your picture, streaking, lining up along the magnetic fields. Also look right about at the top of the sun, just about 12 o'clock, and you see a particularly bright area right along the limb of the sun. That is probably one of these prominences that we talked about. Hot gas in the lower atmosphere of the sun, possibly associated with an explosion that has occurred on the surface of the sun. Material blazing out of the sun at over 2 million miles an hour.
Dr. Gooch, it almost seems as though time has stopped. I mean, I must say, as we see this, and let's remind our viewers, this is a live shot from Hawaii. We're seeing the solar eclipse. But at this point, it seems as though nothing is happening.
That's right.
That it's in dead air.
These gases are in motion, but we have to remind everyone that the diameter of the sun is 864,000 miles. That's almost 1 million miles across that sun. So although those gases are moving at several miles a second in many cases, over the scale of what we're looking at here, that means a tiny fraction of an inch on your television screen in an hour. So yes, you're right. This looks as though it's a still picture, even though it is a dynamic world that we're looking at up there.
Now, those people who are on land who are looking up, did you say that this is the time that they can start to observe this without injuring themselves? That's right. This is perfectly safe to look at. As a matter of fact, not only can you look at this with the naked eye, you can look at this with binoculars or even a telescope, because what's left, this corona that you see there, is no brighter than the full moon. Ah, look again. We just had a better exposure a minute ago where the camera got stopped down, and I don't know if I can relay this at all, or we're just getting what we get. But yes, right now, look before it changes exposure, about 2:30 on the clock, and you see a little bright area right near the edge of the sun. And on a color set that probably looks a little pinkish to you, that is the lowermost part of the sun's atmosphere called the chromosphere. Chromos from Greek meaning color. And this is where hydrogen gas is glowing red in the lowest most parts of the atmosphere. Temperature at the surface of the sun about 11,000 degrees, but up in the corona that we're seeing now over 1 million degrees. And once again, it is standing still in time.
The moon is moving, but the moon is so close to the Earth for this eclipse that the moon's disk is actually a little bit larger than the disk of the sun. And so we see totality throughout the period that the moon's disk covers the sun. It's almost, to exaggerate it, like you're covering a dime with a nickel. And so the nickel has some motion to it before the dime begins to pop out again. That's what we're getting here. And that's why this eclipse is special, because the moon is quite close. And as a result, totality stretches on Hawaii to over 4 minutes in places. In Mexico, it will stretch to almost 7 minutes. And for astronomers who are working feverishly now to get vital information on this atmosphere of the sun, every second counts. Okay, we're beginning to break into the diamond ring as the eclipse ends. There's the diamond ring effect, as you see the bright diamond of photosphere at the top of the image, and the rest of the ring being completed by the rest of that corona. There's a beautiful diamond ring breaking out now. Pretty soon the cameraman will have to diaphragm his camera back down, or he's going to burn his camera. So we'll lose the rest of that diamond ring shortly, and we'll go once again to this very thin crescent that we saw as we went into totality.
Now, as the moon continues and it passes, let me ask again if people can continue to look at this with the naked eye. Once again.
Right, once again, as soon as that diamond ring breaks out, it becomes dangerous. And although there's only a tiny piece of sun there, that one tiny piece of sun is bright enough to still burn the retina of your eye in a few seconds.
And what will scientists discover? What are you looking for, and what can they actually find from this occurrence?
This gives us our only opportunity to see that corona that we just saw during totality, because it's just too faint to see otherwise in great detail. We're mapping that corona out. We're doing studies.
Here are the observers. Obviously, they're thrilled with the opportunity to be there and to see all of this live.
They spent their money, and probably, I think, if you polled them, would tell you they got a very good show for their money.
I'm sure.
It is an unparalleled spectacle of nature.
Well, I must tell you that this has been a delight to have this experience being here with you and getting the same kind of talk I would get if I was sitting at the Hayden Planetarium.
Thank you. Delightful for me to share these live images.
Just a fabulous and spectacular sight. Thank you very much,
You're
Doctor.
welcome.
And when we continue, black politics doesn't mean that you have to be a Democrat anymore. We're going to talk about black conservatives defying the stereotypes.
Everyone's in love with Henry.
About black conservatism, but first, let's get today's
the most widely visible eclipses in history. Hawaii's Big Island had 4 full minutes of lights out less than a half hour ago. The time of totality, when the sun was completely blocked out by the moon, thrilled those who saw it. Mexico is in the grip of eclipse mania now, too, although cloudy skies do threaten to dim the spectacle in some parts of the country. The time of totality in Mexico starts a little more than 30 minutes from now. We're looking right now at a live picture of the moon moving across, covering now about 1/3 of the sun, from a position over La Paz, Mexico. In Mexico City, warnings about how to observe the eclipse safely are being laced with humor. One person even suggesting the safest way to experience the event is to listen to it on the radio. This is the last solar eclipse that will be widely visible from North America until August 21st in the year 2017. Observers across most of the continental U.S. can expect to be eyewitnesses to at least a partial eclipse today.
With the eclipse in Los Angeles just minutes away, let's switch to CNN's Dan Blackburn, who is standing by live there. Dan?
Well, Cheryl, there are people who are in Los Angeles now gathering at some vantage points to take a look at what they hope will be, and of course a very safe look, not looking directly at the sun, what they hope will be a pretty good view of this eclipse. It's been pretty overcast here, as you can see, throughout much of the morning. Clouds coming in offshore has been the main problem rather than the famed Los Angeles smog. The sun will be covered to about 69%. And up at Griffith Park Observatory, from where this picture is coming, about 1,000 people have gathered to take part in what is sort of a communal gathering to watch the eclipse here. There are other people gathered in other nearby observatories up on Mount Wilson, where the weather forecasters have said the view should be really good up above the clouds. More people have gathered to look up from that observatory. In Los Angeles itself, there's no sign yet of cars stopping in the streets or anything like that. We're a little far away from the critical moment for that to happen, or if indeed it will. What we're really doing is, a lot of us, waiting with our fingers crossed to see if indeed some more of this mist and haze in the sky will burn off and give us a much better look yet, one perhaps comparable to some of the great views we've been seeing from Hawaii, hoping to not perhaps quite match that since we only have a 69% eclipse, but generally to get a pretty good look from here in Los Angeles. I'm Dan Blackburn, CNN Live in Los Angeles.
As we've been reporting, the moon will block out about 69% of the sun over Los Angeles in just less than half an hour from now. Elsewhere, here's some of the local viewing times in other cities. Chicago, 2:16. Atlanta, 3:31 p.m. Eastern Time, and New York, 3:34. Only about 2% expected in New York. We have some tips for you on viewing today's eclipse, how to, how not to. CNN science correspondent Mark Levinson is joining us. Mark, what should people be aware of when they're looking at an eclipse, trying to?
Well, Bob, everybody knows that looking at the sun can hurt your eyes, and this is true even when the sun is partially eclipsed. It takes only a few seconds of direct sunlight to scar the back of the eye. You'll feel no pain, but it could result in permanent blindness. Some of the things commonly used to look at the sun but are not completely safe are things like stacked sunglasses or photographic filters, layers of exposed film, smoked glass, dark plastic garbage bags, or even welding goggles. These all cut the sun's glare, but none is able to sufficiently filter out the sun's invisible ultraviolet or infrared radiation that can cause injury. Also, you don't want to use binoculars, a telescope, or a camera viewfinder. They're particularly dangerous since they concentrate the sun's rays. Bob?
Pretty good list of what not to do. Now, there must be a bright side to this. What can you use?
Well, there's only really a couple of ways, safe ways, to view an eclipse directly. One is through a piece of number 14 welder's glass, and this is available from any welding supply store. But you have to make very sure that it is shade 14 or greater, and it is able to completely cover your viewing eye. The second is through a professionally designed viewer, like the one I have here, which is made of aluminized mylar. You can get these from a local planetarium, a museum, or an astronomy group. However, neither of these is really easy to get, so it's recommended that you view the eclipse indirectly. Well, this can be done by using a box like the one that I have here. It has a pinhole at one end, sort of a homemade projector. You may have made one of these when you were a kid.
Good. Pinhole is...
There's a pinhole here, and the sun shines through this pinhole.
We need to turn it around there.
Okay.
Pinhole's in there.
All right. And then we have to look through this little hole in the side, and there's a piece of white paper that's taped inside, and the sun shines through the pinhole, and you can look, as a projector, look at the projected image of the sun and the eclipse safely through this homemade projection device.
All right. Now, grant, for the sake of discussion, that I'm picky and none of that appeals to me. What else can I do?
Well, you can go to a museum or a planetarium that's having one of the many viewing parties, some of which we saw here on CNN a short while ago. They'll probably have a specially equipped telescope as well. Or, as we've seen here on CNN, you can watch it safely on television. Huh?
Mark Levinson, thank you. Cheryl?
Well, of course, those people watching the eclipse are keeping one eye on the weather today. We're going to check in with Valerie Voss and see how things are going in the areas where they're expecting, hopefully, no clouds. Valerie?
Well, Cheryl, we're taking a look at the view of just how much of the eclipse you'll be able to see depending upon where you are living. And as you can see, the farther north and east you go, the less you'll see. And unfortunately, this is part of the country that's going to see plenty of sunshine, generally fair skies across much of the Great Lakes region in the northeast, with the exception of extreme northern New England. In the southeastern U.S., with the eclipse getting underway, there are scattered clouds and some high clouds across the region, but still there should be enough of this eclipse showing through that you'll get to see it. And out in the southwestern U.S., where the best viewing is expected to be, you've already seen parts of that from Los Angeles, and especially down in La Paz in the Baja, where some good visibilities and clear skies are what we're enjoying through the region. In the northwestern U.S., also not a lot to be seen, but generally fair skies, the story across that region. So for eclipse viewers, you're really out of luck across some central sections of the country where dense clouds or heavy rains will keep you from seeing all of that. But the southwestern U.S. and the northeast, what you can see, you will see because of clear skies. We'll keep you updated throughout the day. The news continues now.
Thanks, Valerie. And coming up on Newsday, Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas makes the rounds on Capitol Hill. We'll tell you how he's weathering a small storm.
To see this solar eclipse, the countdown is underway. Let's go to Los Angeles and CNN's Dan Blackburn.
Well, Bob and Cheryl, this is Sunset Boulevard, where people, some of them, have begun to gather to take a look at the eclipse, hoping to get some view of it through a pretty scattered haze. So the actual effect at the moment is more one of, well, I guess, earlier in the morning or later in the afternoon. But it's not likely to darken up a whole lot because that haze that you see so well in the sky today is just dispersing the light around and robbing viewers of much of what they'd like to see. What people at Griffith Park Observatory, however, are seeing is this, because they're looking through the telescope there. And so what they see is the moon moving slowly across the face of the sun as we get closer to the point of maximum coverage as far as Los Angeles is concerned, which is about a 69% coverage of the sun. Incidentally, I should mention that the sun does not really look pink in that sense, but it's an optical effect that is creating it, and you have seen from other pictures that we have seen of the eclipse earlier in the day that the sun takes on a somewhat different color from different locations as the optics change. Nonetheless, it does make for an awesome sight, and people who are able to see it through the telescope, as we do now, are getting the best possible view that you can get. Now, we're only about 20 seconds away from the maximum coverage of the sun by the moon here in Los Angeles and throughout Southern California. 10 seconds now. About 5 seconds. And this is the peak of the eclipse in Los Angeles and Southern California. Further south in Baja, it will be more extensively covered, and of course the greatest coverage was in Hawaii. But this is the view that those who are either in the mountains above this haze are able to see, or those looking through telescopes. Because of the haze in Los Angeles, many people here who had gathered are bound to be a bit disappointed. And of course, hopefully no one is looking at the sun and the eclipse directly, but using some other means of viewing it. This is about as dark as it is going to get in Los Angeles today. Roughly the equivalent of mid to late afternoon on a July in Los Angeles. Nonetheless, still an amazing sight, something seen very, very rarely over this part of the United States and indeed anywhere in the world, this being one of the better eclipses in scientific terms that we have ever had a chance to view. Scientists in some locations getting a very good chance to view the sun's corona and try to wrestle with some of the mysteries of the sun, mysteries that can only really be viewed from this sort of situation. Bob and Cheryl.
Dan, is the telescope you referred to at Griffith Park Observatory above the level of the haze that the human eye has to penetrate? Is that why it's getting this better shot?
No, it's basically that it is simply a telescope that is equipped to do this. It's got filters on it, and it is taking a much better look than the human eye can see. But Griffith Park Observatory is not above the haze except minimally.
Well, what do you see?
So, as you can see, we're looking at the observatory area now, and the haze is pretty good there as well. We're benefiting from pretty good optics on that telescope.
What does a person like you see when you look up?
Haze. What you've been seeing from our camera is pretty much what I see here as well. It's a hazy day, and one of those lazy, hazy days of summer in Southern California.
One of the things that strikes me is how much this eclipsed sun over Los Angeles looks like the cartoonist's view of the moon.
Indeed, it does.
It's a view of the moon we never see in real life, only today. And
in fact, the moon is giving us the sun's crescent much as the sun usually gives us the moon, or the Earth usually gives us the moon's crescent when it's between the sun and the moon.
Are there people around you, Dan? Are people on the streets stopping? Is it having any impact on the ground?
Well, as you can see, there are a few people who have gathered down on Sunset Boulevard to look up using special binoculars or to use pinhole cameras and looking down, depending on what their equipment is. Everyone has, of course, been repeatedly urged not to look up. We have noticed a few people doing that very briefly, but it is, of course, extremely dangerous thing to do. So there are some people who have gathered, but I think most people looking at the haze in the sky probably decided their best view would be on television.
Thank you very much. CNN's Dan Blackburn with the view from Los Angeles. And still to come on Newsday, Mexico prepares for the solar eclipse. We hope to bring you more live pictures from Mexico as it experiences the phenomenon.
And in our series of reports on the buyout of Hollywood, today we'll examine Paramount Pictures, one of the few studios still with U.S. owners.
Newsday continues, followed by International Hour, next on CNN.
Wealth, happiness.
Has meant lights out in Hawaii. This was how it looked over the Big Island about an hour ago. The period of totality, when the sun was completely blocked by the moon, lasted 4 minutes there. Folks in Los Angeles experienced about a 70% eclipse just a short time ago. Smoggy weather dimmed the impact of that for those on the ground somewhat. The shadow of the eclipse is already engulfing much of Mexico. This is the last solar eclipse that will be widely visible from North America until August 21st of the year 2017.
As psychologically vulnerable as Wall Street is, I can't really see anybody blaming the eclipse for whatever's going on the street today.
Never know.
But you never know.
Let's check in with Bill Hartley.
Bob and Cheryl, traders will blame almost anything they can if the market isn't going their way, but right now stocks are holding on to modest gains in a day of choppy trading.
In La Paz, Mexico. Also, a star among stars, Jim Hughes.
2,956. Big board volume moderate. Markets are mixed. Treasury Secretary Nicholas
Coming up next on the International Hour, the latest on the crash of a Saudi airliner with 261 people aboard. We'll talk with someone who was at the scene. Also, a new development in the 1980 crash of an Italian airliner in the Mediterranean, which killed 81 people. Evidence some say may link a NATO missile to the disaster. Bob?
Jim Huber joins us from the CNN Sports Desk with news that those of us speculating that the All-Star game may have marked a turning point had better think again.
Well, some of them really hope so, and the other ones hope they just keep on going straight up from where they were stopped. Baseball gets serious again tonight as it stars, and Lesser Lights return from their midsummer night's break. Some to division leaders, others to teams resigned already to thoughts of next year, like the great shortstop Cal Ripken Jr., going back to a Baltimore team 14 and a half games out already in 6th place. But he goes back as triumphantly as he came.
The best player in the world. Let me see. Pitcher? Fielder? Power hitter? This year alone? Lifetime? Can we just settle this right now and name Cal Ripken? Okay, so he's not a pitcher, but he probably could. And how do you argue his numbers? He's hitting .348, his 18 home runs going into the All-Star game were the most by any American League shortstop in 4 decades. And then, just to prove it was not an aberration, he hit 12 out in the All-Star Home Run Derby. And his 3-run homer, of course, won the All-Star game and earned him Most Valuable Player honors.
I haven't done much offensively in these games. I was trying to figure out why. This year, I had a lot of momentum coming into the All-Star game. I had a very good first half. I was swinging the bat really well. Maybe the home run contest did it. I don't know. It got me over the hump.
There was a moment or two just a year ago, however, when it seemed whatever Cal Ripken had built was crumbling, and he knew it.
I reached a point of total frustration probably a couple weeks before the All-Star game last year. My numbers were down. Specifically, I was hitting about 210, 215. I don't remember what it was. And I almost reached a point where I said, you know, God, I got to go back and learn how to hit all over again.
But even during that down season a year ago, he made only 3 errors in the field, a major league record, at one of the most prone positions in the game as well. And he played on regardless. Oh, does this man ever play on? 1,485 straight games he has played over 9 straight years. Well, not that he's counting.
I try not to think about it. I try to put the streak out of my mind. I try not to sit back and say, God, I played that many games in a row, or how many more games is it going to take to equal Lou Gehrig's mark. You try not to, at all to think about it.
You look at Cal Ripken as Mr. Oriole, and you say, if I had a career, I'd like to be like that. You know, I'd like to be 9 straight All-Star games. I'd like to be Mr. Baltimore. And that's the person you strive to be when you become an Oriole, is Cal Ripken. And for everything he's done on the field, he's done equally as much off the field.
I think when his career is over, everyone will look back and say Cal Ripken Jr. was one of the greatest shortstops to ever play the game of baseball.
And you probably wouldn't argue too much, especially off what you've seen the last few days, if we just gently removed shortstop from that sentence and made it simply one of the best, period.
Getting scary. He's getting better, too. This was his 9th All-Star game and the first home run he'd hit and his first RBI as well. He's getting better. More when sports returns to CNN in the 4 o'clock Eastern Time hour.
Thanks, Jim. We want to take you to the view over La Paz, Mexico right now, where you're still seeing a little tiny sliver of the sun just before the total blackout. This is the longest total eclipse to pass over Mexico City, the world's most populated metropolis, since 1776, and the length of it is expected to last about 6 minutes, will not be surpassed until about 2162, according to the astronomers. Here you can see the view on the ground, and it is dark there. A little darker than it was in Los Angeles when we watched a few minutes ago, and less of the sun was blocked out. Here, expecting the total eclipse to happen in just a couple of minutes. 20 seconds from now. There's a lot of folklore surrounding the eclipses that happen, especially in this part of the world. In pre-Columbian times, particularly among the Aztecs, or the Sun people, they thought this darkness you're about to see was a warning from the gods. They tried to drive it away by making noise and having various ceremonies, and it always appeared to have been successful because the sun would come back after they would have such ceremonies.
As recently as 1970, I believe this is the, okay, here we come.
Near totality.
Near totality. Yeah. As recently as 1970, Cambodians set off their artillery, their military hardware, to scare away the dragon. And there we are with what is called the diamond ring effect, with one huge ray of the sun's light showing it what to us is the top of the moon.
That ring around the sun that you're seeing now is the special thing that the astronomers say that they can never study very well until they have this total eclipse of the sun. They find out a lot of scientific information through studying pictures of that they take during the eclipse.
I believe we're hearing dogs barking.
Now that's just another shot, and it's bright, so it's hard to tell from there that there is the total eclipse. With this picture that you're seeing now, it's a little easier to see. They say that even birds have been known to roost, go to bed for the night when the eclipse happens in different parts of the world. It does fool the animals.
The one phenomenon that we have been alerted to watch for and have not been able to see is the one called Bailey's beads. Just at totality, when the ridges and the mountains and the craters on the moon are reflected, shown through in effect by the rays of the sun, and you get the effect of bright beads, a bright necklace, a diamond necklace surrounding the sun.
This is a little interesting. According to the popular belief in Mexico, pregnant women who are exposed to the solar eclipse will give birth to children who were, they say, eaten by the sun, and the skin of their offspring will be marked by stains. A lot of people there, we are told, still try to avoid being out in the eclipse, especially pregnant women who think that their children may be deformed as a result of being exposed to the solar eclipse.
I think we talk about these things from a standpoint that they're fascinating, they're interesting, they're a little bit amusing. I'm not sure how we would feel, though, had we not the advantage of the hindsight and scientific knowledge that has been handed to us if we suddenly saw the sun blacked out one day. One contemporary Mexican man is quoted as saying that it is God's demonstration of his power to detain the day or the night.
Well, you can see how frightening it must have been to people many, many decades, many, many centuries ago who didn't know what was happening and in effect thought that the sun was going away and wouldn't be coming back.
This is a, seems to me, a very long totality.
I think it was supposed to last about 6 minutes.
7.5 minutes would be the absolute longest at any point, and that may have been here.
The temperatures in Mexico, just a little bit of trivia, are expected to drop at least 5.5 degrees during the eclipse. They will be returning back to normal shortly after the sun is exposed again.
This is, once again, a shot being taken from the southern tip of the Baja Peninsula. If you picture in your mind the map of the western part of the United States, which extends in a long strip of land running down from Southern California and the far western U.S. to the Baja Peninsula, Baja, Mexico. And it has turned out to be an absolutely superior place for viewing this eclipse.
Now, you saw the view in Los Angeles. Not a whole lot of people were stopping on the streets and looking up, but it is different in this part of the world where they have planned a lot of ceremonies, including a ceremony of fire where representatives of different ethnic groups get together and they hold the ceremony at the mythical city of Aztlan, the birthplace of the Aztec people.
A couple of program notes coming up within perhaps the next 10 minutes, perhaps about 10 minutes from now, a news conference with Secretary of State James Baker and his Soviet counterpart Alexander Besmertnik, who have been meeting at the State Department trying to make progress on an arms reduction treaty. And then at 4:30 Eastern Time, President Bush and Japanese Prime Minister Toshiki Kaifu are scheduled to emerge from their discussions. And also, again, to meet reporters, CNN plans to bring you live coverage of both.
A little bit of trivia here that the longest eclipse of the 20th century happened on June 20th back in 1955 over the Indian Ocean. That one lasted 7 minutes, 8 seconds. That was said to be 10 seconds longer than they expect today's to last.
Then I'm wrong on my 7.5 minutes.
Well,
it's going to be a 7. 7 is apparently the
about
maximum.
7 minutes.
And we would expect the sun to be bursting forth any moment here. Totality should be coming to an end. And our live coverage of this eclipse over La Paz and elsewhere will continue in a moment.
Before you really buy something, you should thoroughly investigate.
Now looking at Guadalajara, Mexico live with wonder and delight. Stargazers watch as the moon overtakes the sun.
A message for President Bush as the U.S. and the Soviet Union search for agreement on arms control.
And new evidence in a years-old plane crash off the Italian coast. Welcome to our viewers across the United States and around the world. I'm Catherine Cryer in Atlanta.
And in Washington, I'm Frank Sesno. Thanks for joining us. A jetliner full of Muslim pilgrims crashed in Saudi Arabia today. All 261 people on board died when the chartered Canadian DC-8 slammed down in flames.
The moon is totally blocking the sun. This is the, well, almost totally the, it looks like we are now coming out of the total eclipse over Guadalajara. Now, this is the longest eclipse since one over Africa in 1973. It will hold that distinction for more than a century. Central and Southern Mexico are among the spots with a total eclipse, along with Hawaii, parts of Central America, Colombia, and Brazil. A partial eclipse is going to be seen in parts of Northern and Southern America. From the ground in Hawaii, cameras caught an image, the image of the moon slipping over the sun. All that could be seen there in Hawaii was a thin, fiery ring wrapped around a lunar shadow. Cloud cover made the spectacle less than perfect for many scientists, but many tourists gasped as the sky went dark. Now, of course, experts warn against